All right. So, my guest today is a very special person, Emily Robbert, who is also my younger sister. And I could not be more excited to share her with you all. From a very early age, Emily is what I say, of the three of us girls in my family, she is the popular one. It doesn't matter where she goes, she has a following. People love her. So, and there's good reason why. I know you will too. You're going to want to become her best friend after you hear this. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Emily.
Hi, so
Hi,
happy to
thanks
be
so much
on
for
here.
yes, thanks for being here. With this huge time difference and stuff, it's just so cool to be able to coordinate from around the world. So why don't you tell our listeners where you are and kind of what a typical day in the life for you is like right now, so they get an idea of what you're all about.
Yeah, great. Well, I am super excited to have this conversation with you. And we talked before we started recording that it's crazy to be in a more formal conversation because we talk all the time informally. But yeah, my husband and I live in Southern Africa. So our life looks the same and very different than it would if we were living in the States. So for me, I am a stay-at-home wife slash foster mom, soon to be adoptive mom. And I try to get up pretty early before my foster son gets up, just to start the day. And I prioritize doing Pilates or yoga or just some type of movement in the morning. And my husband makes me coffee during that time, and then I am able to just wake up more slowly. Right now, I am currently doing a clean eating lifestyle, so that requires a lot of food prep. I'm also really passionate about cooking everything from scratch and creative cooking. So I spend a lot of my day cooking, cleaning the house, laundry, etc., just housewife stuff. And then I also homeschool our foster son. He's 12 and he has a lot of special needs. So we're currently doing preschool and dealing with homeschooling and just trauma and everything that his needs require. There's a lot of intermissions throughout my day of just helping and tending and caring for him. So my days are they could be the same, but they also are very different depending on kind of where he's at and what his needs are.
Absolutely. Which kind of leads us to the topic specifically. I know you could speak on so many topics that I want to cover for our audience today. I was thinking about it this morning on my walk, how no one wants to be an expert in burnout. That's kind of like the expertise you don't want to have. But
For sure.
yeah, but based on your life, I would say you're somewhat of an expert on burnout. And so I want, if you could just share with everyone what your first encounter was with burnout.
Yeah. I was thinking this morning that I don't think I'm an expert on burnout, but I do think that I've learned a lot from it and I'm still on the journey. I think I first experienced burnout a year and a half after living overseas. So it was about a year and a half in that I just started to experience burnout in the form of compassion fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Working at an orphanage, also, I was living there and I was young, single in a poverty stricken third world country. You never escape the constant need, you never escape your work. Like you're always surrounded by it. From my bedroom, from my pillow, I could hear babies crying. I could hear people yelling, to communicate different things. I could hear the culture all around me. That I never had a break from it. Also, during that time, there was a lot of experiences that happened all in a row in a short amount of time that were traumatic. We had a baby pass away at the orphanage. We had children being transferred to a different care facility that was a different standard of living than we have at the orphanage that we work for, that would lose the potential of adoption for these kids that got transferred. There were just a lot of really challenging experiences that I was experiencing for the first time, that just this constant need for compassion and being an empathetic person just really wore down on me. And so that was probably my first experience of living and working in an environment where you see the consequence of humanity's worst. The whole reason why we have orphans is because of the worst in humanity.
Yeah.
And that, when you internalize that, and I'm a deep processor and a deep feeler, so I didn't just see the child, I saw their story behind them. And that was a huge burden that I was carrying around, and I didn't know at that time how to carry that burden and be healthy mentally and emotionally myself. So I think for me, that was when I first noticed that I felt burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say, for our listeners, I know, chronic fatigue is something that is becoming very widespread and talked about as well. When you say burnout, like what were some of your symptoms? Did it feel like what people call chronic fatigue or even adrenal fatigue is thrown around all the time now? Like what were some of your symptoms? And do you see it all as really interwoven or separate, different things? Could you talk to that?
Yeah, I see them actually as two complete entities. I do think that one can lead to the other. But for me, I experienced both. I had, during that time, about a year and a half into my time overseas, I developed mono, which became chronic mono, which then turned into chronic fatigue. And the difference that I see is that chronic fatigue is a form that of burnout, but it can be dealt with physically. You can do things externally to improve it, where burnout is more internal. You can't just change external things in order to overcome it or work through it. You have to work internally. There's a lot of internal work that you have to do to overcome it. So I do believe that chronic fatigue is also a byproduct of burnout. But burnout, I mean, at the root of it, really starts with fatigue, but that's not always physical. It can be exhaustion of the heart, exhaustion of the mind, exhaustion of the soul, and all of that kind of, I mean, because it's not good for our body, that translates into a physical exhaustion. But for me, chronic fatigue was I couldn't get out of bed, or I took a shower and had to take a nap because that was so much work. Or, I made breakfast and I had to go take another nap. Like, I couldn't work out because my body couldn't handle more stress. But when I'm only experiencing burnout and not chronic fatigue, then I know working out is actually a really good option because it helps my body and mind heal. So I actually see them, at least from my experience, as very different. But I also think that if you focus on chronic fatigue as only physical, you are also missing out on some of the mental aspects that can come with chronic fatigue. I mean, I know that if you're laying in bed and you literally can't get up because you're so exhausted, or you have to take 5 naps every day, like that can lead to depression and other things that cause internal work. So they're not entirely different, but I also think sometimes you have to deal with them from very separate places.
Yeah, I think that is tremendous insight and probably really helpful for our listeners to be able to parse that out. Would you say then, someone could have burnout and not have chronic fatigue yet. Probably their body will catch up eventually. So like you could have burnout and still be going 100 miles an hour. Is that possible? Or like by the time you realize you have burnout, you're already like, laying in bed and you can't get out? Or is it possible for someone to run burnt out, but still on high speed for a while?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. My husband and I have experienced this here because we can't stop always. Like there are things we have to do, people that are depending on us, but at the same time, we feel like we are burnt out. So I think what happens is that you remove your heart from it. If you don't stop and you don't acknowledge I'm burnt out and I'm going to actually work toward overcoming this, there is just the temptation to remove your heart or remove your mind, remove your passion from it. And you just continue doing the action, which I don't believe is actually helpful. And I don't believe that that's beneficial to you and your health or the people that you are doing those things for, because they see that you're not showing up as your whole self. And I mean, who we are in our most enjoyable state is bringing our passion, our heart, our mind, and if we leave all of that at the door and we enter in just to do the work, we are not very enjoyable to be around, to other people, but even to ourselves. That's not enjoyable for ourselves to be around.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that leads me to ask, what do you think, are there certain people you feel are more susceptible to burnout? And like, what are some of the, if you were to go back, some of the lifestyle habits, kind of just ways of living that make you more susceptible to burnout?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of research on this when I first was experiencing this, because I was noticing that a lot of people in high compassion or empathy fields were feeling very similarly to how I was. So any type of caregiver, any type of job that requires high empathy, therapist, doctor, nurse, I mean, all these different fields that require a lot of heart, you're likely to experience burnout. I also think that I'm a huge fan of the Enneagram. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, and being a high people pleaser can also be a quality that maybe a weakness, however you want to word it, that can be more susceptible to burnout. Also a performer, somebody that's always wanting, to perform for people. I would say somebody with lack of boundaries. That was a huge wake-up call for me, that I realized I didn't have any boundaries. And I kind of had the perfect storm to experience burnout, being I fit all of these categories. But I also think it can really impact women, and especially mothers are very susceptible, because you're in a job, so to speak, that never ends. And in a different capacity. I was a caregiver when I first experienced burnout at the orphanage, and now bringing home a child from the orphanage and fostering him and being a 24-hour caregiver, I'm experiencing those symptoms differently now. So I definitely think that, yeah, just people with high empathy have to really watch out for running themselves dry.
Yeah. Well, and like you mentioned, it's not necessarily even just highly empathetic, work, but also it could be a lack of boundaries. And so that whole idea of something I'm personally working on a lot is, the saying yes when you mean no, and like no to what you really do want when it's proposed to you or whatever, like that causes that internal, like, sense of chaos and it can deplete you if you're not really showing up for yourself and voicing what you need or what you don't need or whatever. So even people in that, like that alone is enough to cause burnout. Is that what you would say?
Yes, for sure. I mean, you could still be a single person with no husband, no kids, and still experience burnout just from life, from the just the pace of life, always saying yes. And when I first became a missionary overseas, I was single and I experienced burnout just for the pure amount of needs that were brought to me that were expected of me to fulfill, and not having the boundaries to say, or the wisdom to say, no, I can't do it all. So definitely, like, lack of boundaries is huge, huge. That leads to burnout.
Yeah. So when you first started to identify that this, burnout was something that you were experiencing, like what were your symptoms as far as like in your body, in your emotions, even in your relationships? Because someone who's burnt out shows up to relationships very differently, as well.
Mm,
So like, what are some of those symptoms that you experienced? How did you know?
mm. Yeah, I think for me, I experienced just the sense of exhaustion that wasn't even physical. It was just this, I was so tired, even mentally, and my heart was so tired. I also experienced a lack of creativity. I
Mm,
always know when I am not in a good place because all of my creativity just goes outdoor. Um, I'm no longer thinking outside the box. I'm no longer wanting to express creativity. Um, but I also experienced that I wasn't able to sit in the pain of others and be fully present in the way that I could, before. And that was huge for me because I'm someone that is very comfortable just sitting in the pain and sitting in the sorrow. And when I knew that that was causing me anxiety and I wanted to run, and it was almost like this feeling of like, don't break down, I can't handle that. Like, I knew something is really not right. Um, and that was huge for me when I couldn't be present with people. That was really disturbing to me, and I knew something was wrong. But also, I think for me, I realized my capacity for relationships really went down. I didn't have the same capacity to, um, be just with people. I used to be very extroverted, and I actually feel like burnout and becoming a foster mom has changed my capacity, to where, and almost my personality, to where I'm more introverted and I prefer being alone or in small groups now. Um, and some of that, I think, is possibly a sign that I'm experiencing some burnout, but I also think it's a symptom of when I'm around too many people and I'm sensing all of their needs, that creates exhaustion. That's exhausting.
mhm.
So I think just noticing your capacity change, even for little things, like if you are no longer feeling like you can, go to the store, you're no longer feeling like you can cook, or I mean, basic things, or showering becomes a burden. You kind of can be aware that something is not right if all of these things feel like a burden. Um, and
That
for
is,
me, when I knew that I wanted to avoid people and I didn't want to take care of myself, like, I knew that something was wrong.
yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah. When you're just talking and stuff, in my own journey, like those are a lot of the same things. The shift that happened between being a single, very connected, involved, community oriented, several nights a week, in group things, to being a mom of one, a stepmom of one, and a wife. Like, I mean, my capacity to handle anything outside just even that is so small. And I think sometimes
Mhm.
maybe there's this transition period that happens as well, and you have to reacclimate. And maybe once you reacclimate, your capacity might grow a little bit more. But especially, I think in the newness, that's where I don't know, you just become really aware of like these new limits you didn't realize you had, but then your load is also
Mhm.
really different. And so, um, yeah, I've definitely experienced that too, that,
Mhm.
that after the morning shower, it's like 8 o'clock and you need to go back to bed just from the shower. So
Mhm.
it's like, there's nothing more debilitating. You realize you still have a whole day left to be alive and awake. And
Mhm.
you're like, what? um, yeah,
Yeah.
scary stuff. So I'm really curious. So for you, once you identified some of those symptoms for you, that what you're really expressing too is like, for you, it felt foreign. You felt like it was foreign to you to have someone bring their need and not want to sit with them and feel almost like, oh, please don't break down, like you said. That felt really foreign to who you thought you were and what you thought you enjoyed being a part of and stuff. So I think that's really helpful too for people, to be able to recognize what feels really different from what I feel like is really innately me. And all of a sudden
Mhm.
it's not the same anymore, and identifying that. What was the first thing that you did when you realized this? What were some of like your
Mhm.
immediate interventions sort of thing?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the most important thing in that moment is to take a break, to physically remove yourself if you can, um, but not to stop there. One of my mentors told me, if you're truly burnt out, then just a break is not going to help. It's going to take months of actual work and healing in order to return no longer burnt out or to burn out the moment you get back. And, for my husband and I being overseas, that actually literally means leaving the fields, like on a furlough, removing ourselves, because even when we're at home, we're still in the culture and we're still here. So, but for somebody, in all different circumstances, it could mean, taking a vacation or going out into the woods or, going to the ocean, wherever you're at. But removing yourself, I think is really important to just have a clear mind to be able to figure out what you need, and then how to communicate that to the people around you. So for me, I actually did end up going back to the States, for a couple months to just be able to have a break and to process through what I had experienced. And during that time, sought out therapy and also surrounded myself with really good community. And I would say the combination of taking a break, seeking therapy, surrounding yourself by highly positive influences in your life, and kind of taking a break or a step back from maybe toxic relationships or relationships that require a lot from you, if that's possible, and being able to just embrace people that will embrace you no matter what season you're in and for who you are, even when you're not your best. And also people that will just have fun with you, um, so that you can, I think when you're experiencing burnout, it feels really heavy and the world, everything feels really heavy. And you need people in your life who can just make you laugh and have fun. And so that you have moments of reprieve, moments of relief. And I think I realized that, so I went home from Africa, and then from there, I ended up moving across the country. And the people in my life who I had, in the Midwest were the people I needed in that season. They were just highly encouraging and just a really great support system. So I think having people that are willing to listen and process with you, in addition to professional help, can be really helpful. And those are the main steps that I took that brought me through and the other side, um, to be able to return to Southern Africa in a more full place where I could give again without it, causing a lot of harm to myself.
Yeah. So So you would say your first intervention is to remove yourself from the situation that is contributing mostly like to the burnout.
Mm.
What would you say to someone who, though, and I mean, speak for yourself as well, because your life situation now is a lot different than it was then. Being married and having a foster son, you can't just say peace out and
Yeah.
abandon for 3 months, you know? And I have felt that too. It's like single person say peace out and go, you know, retreat is so much easier now that, you know, I'm a wife and a step parent. Like, what do you recommend to the person who's now in that life phase and that they're like, I don't know how to literally remove myself from my situation and not lose all the things, the people I love, you know? What would you say to
Mm.
them?
Yeah. No, it's so true. I've had to really think about it differently. Being a wife and now a caregiver, you know, being anybody who has children with special needs, you can't just leave your kids with anyone. You really, really cannot leave them, except for a very small, like, I mean, not even as big as a handful of people. Um, so it really limits you. So for me, what this has looked like in more recent seasons, even the current season that I'm in right now, is seeking out professional help for sure. Um, and I also think having breaks built into your routine and your schedule. So for me, this has looked like I am going to instill a 2-hour quiet time every afternoon in my home, and the whole house does it. And so, you know, especially as we've been going through coronavirus and my husband and, you know, foster son have been home all the time with me. And so, um, you know, my foster son goes into his room and he plays quietly for 2 hours. My husband and I sit together, but we don't interact, you know, and we have what we call separate together time. And so we
Yes.
read, we're avid readers, you know, we read, we nap, we do whatever we need just to have quiet and to have a break every day. And we literally like live for that break. So I think that is so essential when you can't escape the environment, is to be able to retreat within the environment, to a safe place and to a quiet place that you will not be disturbed. Um, and setting that standard, like, it is okay as a mom of any kind to tell your kids, do not talk to me unless you're breaking a bone or something's on fire. Like, do not talk to me. And even, I mean, it's not rude, it's for their own benefit. I mean, if I want to be nice to them, it's really crucial. So I think that's huge. And then I think the other thing for me is just adequate sleep has been huge. But another intervention that I have just really recently started taking is really prioritizing physical health. I mean, physically, the way that you feel directly impacts how you treat other people. It just does, especially as a woman, and hormones and all of that. Like, you are just so impacted by how your body feels. And so doing clean eating, exercising, all of that, it also helps your sleep, has really impacted my ability to have energy throughout the day and to not be more likely to burn out or to be exhausted. Um, so I think that's some of it.
Can I say something really quick? I'm so excited that
Yeah.
you brought that up because I think, I mean, everything's so intertwined, and here at Worth Wellness, we're really focused on getting you to hear all the different alarm bells going off and figure out how they all work together. It's not just a physical problem or just, you know, a mental challenge that you're experiencing. And so I would love for you to share, for you, like, did your, like, on a really practical level, did your diet have to change significantly? Did how often you work out or what kind of workouts you did, like, in your, you know, as you talk about interventions, like what kind of was your, this is what I like to say. And when you experience a debilitating health crisis, you no longer can afford to ignore those things that you did earlier, where you're like, I know this food makes my stomach hurt, but you know what the heck, you know, we'll be gone tomorrow kind of thing.
Mm.
Like, I know for me in my own journey, I'm like, I can't afford to be that sick ever again. It's like what I say to myself, like,
Mhm.
I mentally cannot afford to do that, you know? And so it makes me so aware. It just changed my approach to how I fuel and feed my body, because I just feel like it's no longer just, I'll recover tomorrow sort of thing, or I'll sleep, sleep the sugar off or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious for you, like, was it a really big shift? Like, what were some of those things that you had to do?
Mm, yeah. The diet has been huge. So I have been a foster mom for a year and a half now. And for the first, well, up until a month ago, I did a lot of stress eating and a lot of coping through eating. We would be dealing with a trauma outburst, and my husband and I would reward ourselves for getting through that with a cookie, or cake. I mean, it was just like, I realized how much my rewarding myself was related to food. And that did not make me feel good or energized. But I also prioritized health in a weird way. I now see as weird, because I would still get up and work out, but I hated it. And I would do like an elliptical bike, and I would try to make myself do it for 15 minutes, but it was so miserable and so boring that I would get to 10 or 12 minutes and I would just be done, because it was so unenjoyable. And I did just eat whatever I wanted, still very balanced and very, from scratch, so it wasn't like we were eating junk all the time, but everything was homemade. But I just didn't think I was allergic to anything, or how it would impact my body. I didn't want it bad enough. And then just a month ago, I decided that, I was ready to try if that would impact, just my exhaustion. I wasn't making it through a single day without having to sleep in the afternoon. And maybe other people listening to this are laughing because they can't either, but I just thought, surely there's another way to not have to spend 45 minutes, out of it every afternoon, because I can't function the rest of the day. Like, there has to be a better way. And I especially was motivated because we're near the end of our adoption process. Our daughter is supposed to come home within the next month.
Oh,
And
so fun.
I know we're so excited, but I knew that bringing in another kid who, she's 5 years old, who's been through trauma, who's been in an orphanage her whole life, like, that's only going to add to our stress. And that's going to add to the likelihood of getting burnt out. And so I need to do everything I can to be the best version of myself now, before we bring her in to our home. And so I was really motivated to try. So I've taken out sugar, gluten, and dairy. I have not needed to nap in a whole month. And that has, like, I don't even remember the last time that I could have said that. I mean, probably my entire adult life, I've needed a nap. Huge difference. And then my husband and I had our anniversary last week, and we went away, and I just said, okay, I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm not going to worry about it. I ate the cake, I ate the bread, I ate the dairy, and I felt horrible. At the end of the day, I had a headache every night. I felt so full. I just didn't feel good. And so when I got home, I was immediately motivated to go back into it and to actually have it be a lifestyle change.
Mhm.
So I do think the physical really impacts, your ability to handle life. My ability to handle life when I'm doing this is a lot greater than when I'm just eating my emotions or eating whatever I want.
Mm. I love that story so much, because it speaks so much to my own experience, but also we get so used to feeling like crap all the time. And I
Mm,
think sometimes, you know, even in my own situation, or maybe other people, when we're talking too about what do you do when you have burnout, but you have these commitments, you can't just abandon your life. Okay, this is one of the easiest things to implement that can make drastic difference is just purely your diet, something like that, figuring out what are irritants for you, what are, the whole thing, kryptonite foods, your foods that are killer for you. And at least starting there, like maybe you can't, just go on a retreat for 3 months somewhere else. But you can change your diet. And for you, like you've seen huge improvement just in energy level and being able to show up your best self, even though you are still in a really high stress situation. I believe it's Emily Nesbitt who talks about this idea of addressing the stress and the stressors separately. You can't always remove the stressors. You're going to have traffic, you're going to have high need children or whatever, or third world country stressors that don't go away. But you can deal with the actual stress and how you're dealing with that. And I feel like the food piece is a very easy way to deal with the stress, even when the stressors don't change, and it can really impact that stress feeling. So I love that you have found that. That's so cool that you found that for yourself to be true.
Yeah.
Now, in shifting gears a little bit, because I know, especially in your situation, trauma and grief actually are pretty common themes. And so how would you say trauma plays a role in this burnout and fatigue? Like, how do you have to, do you feel like, again, like, are those things you have to heal from separately, or is it intertwined? Like, what role do you think trauma plays in burnout?
I think it plays a huge role. I think burnout is often a series of little t traumas. I think often when you start living with undealt, what I call, or, I've taken from other people, little t traumas are just these events that are cause grief, cause heartache, are disrupting whatever, and you move on and you continue on with life without dealing with them. And then the next one happens, and the next one happens, and you're not even recovered from the first one. So it creates chaos in your mind, and the trauma becomes even bigger in your mind than maybe it really was physically, because you didn't deal with it and you didn't deal with the impact that it had on you. So from my experience, trauma, especially undealt with trauma and a series of trauma, definitely leads to burnout. I actually experienced going to a professional therapist to only deal with those traumatic events and nothing else. And that was actually very beneficial for me. I'm a huge advocate of professional therapy and doing EMDR for trauma. There's other ones you can do as well, different methods.
Can you share with our listeners really quick what a EMDR is for those who don't know?
Yeah, it's rapid eye movement. I am not a counselor, and so I know that
So just speak from your
I'm
experience.
not saying exactly what all the initials stand for, but but it's basically connecting the left side and the right side of your brain. And so your counselor walks you through the traumatic experience without reliving the trauma, which I thought was really, really good and important. But you talk through it, and you talk through it from an outside perspective. So if you were looking at through the window, looking at yourself in the situation that happened, then you're seeing it from that third person. And while you're talking through it and talking through, the different parts, what you were doing, what was going on, what other people were doing, you're going through the different emotions and kind of what happened. While it's either a tap, like on the knees, where you do left, right, or it can be like a vibration that's going off while you're holding like a remote that's vibrating in your hands, to left, right, and it's connecting those brain waves. And so you're rewiring how you think about it, and you're rewiring how that last impression is made. So for me, being able to walk through that, and being able to leave that traumatic experience with a different narrative and realizing that now I see it through the third person. And now my brain waves are going through that third person looking in through that window rather than me in the moment still feeling that trauma. When I remember that moment, I'm no longer, my heart's not racing. I'm no longer currently still there. I'm able to remove myself and realize this is what happened, but I processed through it and I'm not still in that moment. I don't know if that really helps. That was kind of my experience with it.
Yeah, no, that is so helpful, I think, for listeners. And of course, there are a lot of modalities, treatment therapy modalities that work, and it might be something different for a different person. But I would say someone who's not sure if they've had trauma, how do you know what a trauma is? Like, what would your way of being if someone was like, I don't know, like, I mean, I've had these things, like, how do I know what's still trauma lingering, undealt with, you know?
Yeah, well, I I heard somebody define it who's, smarter than I am and has, the professional background. It's something like it's anything that you were unprepared or didn't have the tools to go through.
Mm.
And I mean that brings up a lot of different things. Um Basically, if you're not sure if what you experienced is a trauma, it probably is. Because if you're still thinking about it, you're still trying to decide if you should talk to a counselor about it, probably is something that has deeply impacted you.
Can I ask a
I also
question?
think, for sure, yeah.
Okay, so I'll use myself as the guinea pig. So the last couple nights I've had a really hard time sleeping, and I wake up at 2 and I'm awake for hours and can't go back to sleep. And I think it was last night. I keep thinking about, I recently lost my job, like this specific like moment over and over again, this phrase of like, you know, the person telling me you're losing your job. And, in my head, I'm like, this job loss has been the catalyst for launching Worth Wellness, and so much good has come out of it. But that line like haunts me in the middle of the night. So would you say like that you would, in this case, like that's probably trauma? I mean, would you say that
Mm,
if
yeah,
something haunts you in the middle of the night and wakes you up?
yeah. Well, and even that it was something unexpected and you weren't prepared to handle.
Yes.
And I also think that whenever something has a physical response, it's trauma, because trauma affects you physically. Trauma physically affects your brain and your body. And so if it is affecting your body, it is most likely a traumatic event. I know for me, when my foster son is in one of his trauma episodes, um, my husband and I experienced secondhand trauma. And our bodies are physically shaking. We are physically in adrenaline. We are physically having, our heart is beating, like there is a physical response that we have experiencing that secondhand trauma, which is its own trauma. And so I definitely think that, if you have physical symptoms of an event or something that was said or done or whatever to you or around you, or to somebody you love or whatever, like there's definitely a flag, that's possibly something to explore more. And even just acknowledging, in that situation of, this is something that was really hard and this deeply impacted and affected me. And maybe you don't need to, go to therapy for 3 months over it. Maybe you do, because it brings up a bunch of other things. But at least taking time to process it and acknowledge the fact that this is affecting you is really important.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about what you said too, like, how do you know? And you're like, well, if you're trying to figure it out, you're not sure it probably is, sort of thing. One of the other things I recently heard, I think it was also Emily Nesbitt, who was talking about how undealt with, traumas, wait for you. They wait for you to deal with them. So it could happen like you're 5 or something and you don't have the tools and the wherewithal, but it's going to wait for you. It's going to stay there in your body until you're able to deal with it. It patiently waits
Mm.
for you. It doesn't just leave on its
Yeah.
when I heard that, I was like, oh shoot, it's waiting for me. It's not just going to
Yeah.
dissolve or evaporate, So I think
Mhm.
that, yeah, that really resonated with me too. When you said that, I was like, yeah, it's waiting for you. Like if you have to ask that,
Mhm.
whether or not it is, it's probably because it's been waiting there for you and it needs you to deal with it now. So
Yeah.
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 So would you be able to share with us kind of what okay, so first of all, let me back up. Do you feel like it's possible to like burnout proof your life? Do you feel like you've
Mm.
gotten to that point where you're able to create, a lifestyle where it's like burnout proof? Um, and if so, like what are some of those secrets? Or do you think that's not possible? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Mm. You know, I don't think it's possible to fully live your full self, to be fully engaged and fully present, and to not experience or to fully, you know, burnout proof your life. I have rephrased it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Now, maybe people who are not as driven by passion or um, maybe some personalities could do that. Um, but I think if you are fully showing up with all of your passion and all of your heart and your mind, um, experiencing at least symptoms, whether or not it fully develops, I think is probably likely to happen. I do think that depending on how self-aware you are, that can also really help deter burnout. If you are highly aware of those symptoms, you can prevent it from becoming a full-blown season or a full-blown experience. But I think we're likely to all experience symptoms at certain points of our life, depending on what's going on and the stress in our life. I think has a huge part to play in it.
yeah. That's similar to what kind of my approach to anxiety is, in that the goal isn't to anxiety proof your life. You're going to experience it, but a lot of it's focused on like shortening that gap. And also you
Mm.
can build mastery over specific stressors. Like you can learn how to deal with them, but then do recognize next week there will probably be a new one and you're going to learn how to do that
Mhm.
one. But if you have the tools, you can use them to apply to whatever else comes up. And like you said, be more aware and be able to better sense like, oh wow, I'm starting to hit that point because I know what that point feels like. I've acknowledged it. I can like bring my tools in. um so for you, what do you feel like are some of, I know you mentioned the 2-hour quiet rest, that you have in your
Mhm.
home, and you are obviously a very self-aware person, and therapy and things like that. But what are, if there is any others in diet, how how would you say someone can um work towards a life that they don't have to suffer so much from burnout? Maybe it's they experience some symptoms, but they're able to recover more quickly. It doesn't take 3 months away from everything to get back to life,
Mhm.
I guess. What would you say that some
Mhm.
of those secrets are for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, some things I mentioned and then something different. I think my secrets, I guess, would be having self-care built into my routine. Um, so that would be the working out, the eating well, the 2-hour rest time where I can do whatever I want. Because as a caregiver, you often can't do that. And so being able to choose what I want to do during that time um, is huge. And then having boundaries. I pretty much, I mean, I say no all the time and it's so freeing. It's great. And so I think that is huge. Um, I also think prioritizing your health so that you can show up to your relationships and your calling or your job or whatever it is healthy, is so important. You have to be determined to prioritize your self-care and your health. Otherwise, it will not happen because no one else is going to prioritize that for you.
Thank you.
You
Yes.
have to, right? Amen.
Mhm.
And I think the key is when you have other people that need you, the key is you can't always prioritize yourself all the time. That, I think, is why a lot of people who struggle with self-care as a form, they view it as a form of selfishness because they see it as, that I'm only thinking about myself and I'm not caring for other people. But that's actually not self-care, because self-care is not just being selfish all the time. Self-care is knowing you are prioritizing yourself, but that doesn't mean that you are the priority all the time. So for me, what that looks like is foster son has a trauma outburst. In that moment, I am not the priority. In that moment, getting him to a safe place, getting him to be calm, making sure my husband is okay, how it's impacting him, making sure nothing's going to burn down and nobody's going to commit murder. Like, these are the essentials in that moment.
Totally.
But, at the same time, I know in my heart and my mind that as soon as it is safe for me, I will remove myself from the situation. Again, that could just be a safe room. It's usually always just a safe room. And I will be able to take my journal, take my calm music, take whatever, and bring myself down and deal with that trauma or deal with that event that happened. So I am prioritizing myself, but at the same time, I know that I can't do that all the time. But I'm aware when I can't do it that I'm important. I will have a date with myself to figure this out and work through it at a later time. And also acknowledging, I think, that my husband is an adult and he can do the same. And I don't need to be constantly like, for me, I want to make sure everything's okay before I deal with myself. And that's not always healthy either. It's good to, check in and make sure that people are okay enough for you to remove yourself, but also realizing that if there's other adults that are in this with you, that they can do the same thing and that you don't have to always accommodate to them before you prioritize your own health. So I really had to learn that.
That is just gold. I am learning so much. I think about that too, this whole idea of being a self-manager. I think a lot of what leads us to burnout is managing everyone else and trying, like, that feeling of I need to help manage everyone's feelings and emotions and the way they take care of themselves, and just realizing like I need to be a self-manager. Like, that is the first priority, is like, am I managing my stress well? And then I can support them and encourage, say it's a spouse, them to, be able to do that and maybe help create a space for them to do that too. But like you said, like, you have to feel okay with prioritizing your own management of the trauma and know that he can do the same too. I think too, what you were saying about the whole idea of self-care, I love that it's not always putting yourself first necessarily, because I think a lot of people get hung up on that. Like, I have people I'm responsible to take care of. Like, I don't have the time to do that. But I think paying attention to how everything affects you, and like you said, it will be waiting there. Like I said earlier, it will be waiting there for you. Do you have a time even every day carved out where you can address what was waiting for you, even if you couldn't, like, in the moment, sort of thing? Like you said, you can't in the moment just be like, I'm going to take a bubble bath during this episode with your foster son.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's going to look at you like, what on earth, but realizing, like, that happened. Maybe tomorrow morning I need an extra minute or whatever it is, or before bed once things have calmed down. Yeah. Okay, which brings me to kind of the last thing I want to go into. I'm really glad you brought it up, the whole communicating burnout to others, because we definitely, especially in America, and I think in probably the missionary world, there's their own version of this, just maybe looks different. But it's so praised and celebrated if you are busy till you turn blue and pass out. And if you have so much, the more you have on your plate, it's a status symbol. The more friends you have, the more, how often you're on social media. And that's because those behaviors are societally rewarded. Like you actually get rewards for doing that. And so it's reinforced. So what would you say about someone really that's going to go against all the grain and say, I actually am burnt out. I have to change everything. Like you said, you say no all the time and it's freeing. But that, like the other people on the other side of the no, especially if you were a yes person most of your life, and they are used to you always saying yes and showing up. How do you deal with that? Like, where do you start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been a lot of mess, I guess, for me, because I was always a yes person. That I feel like creating boundaries in my life and communicating those needs of self-care and needs of different seasons and my different capacity, I feel like it's been really messy. So I think the biggest thing is being honest. I've tried to do it inadvertently, and that's what's created mess, because then people don't understand, or they take it personally or whatever. And I've learned through that experience, or through those experiences, that if the person is safe, that it's okay to tell them exactly what is happening. And I think for me, just being able to communicate that my season of life has changed, or my energy or my stress or whatever it is has changed, and I don't want to burn out. And so because of that, I'm going to be saying no more often. Even if you address it beforehand, before you have to say no. And then actually, I've experienced that when I say that beforehand, people ask you to do things a lot less, because they know that your chance of saying no is a lot higher.
Which is helpful. Then you don't have to say no as much if they don't ask as much.
Yeah, it's less painful for you, for sure.
Totally.
I also think it's a change of mindset, because I always was afraid I was letting people down, or if I didn't do it, who would? And I realized that's having too high of an opinion of yourself. You realize that you're saying yes because you're afraid that you're the only person that can do that.
How many wives
no.
are sitting here thinking, oh, shoot,
Yeah.
my husband can do the dishes. He can.
Yeah. Or your kid really can fill up their own water bottle. Like, they can't, they are so capable of doing more things to help you. So I definitely think that when I realized that, it really shifted my perspective. Also, not jumping in to save people before they even ask. I did that all the time. And it was like, I had said yes before they even asked. I just started doing it, or started filling that gap. And I've now really practiced not inserting any help or advice or anything, whether that's mental help or physical help, until somebody asks, because that is energy that I don't need to expend unless it's needed. And it's only needed if they're going to ask. And if they're not going to ask, they're probably not ready for that physical or mental or emotional help. So
those are words
I think that is huge.
By. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my word.
So you do need to prepare your community a little bit. I mean, mainly if it's somebody you're living with, but even more than that, preparing your own minds, and realizing that you are not the sum of what you do for other people. You are your own person, and being sure that how you are going to help somebody is actually what they need, not just what they're asking or wanting or not even communicating, but actually what they need. And that's been huge living in a third world country, because a lot of people ask for things. We've really had to step back and say, but is that really a need? I think they just want that. Or taking the time to see if that's really a need. And then if it really is, figuring out how and when you can help them. Just the other day, I was going to the grocery store, and my husband was home with our foster son, and I didn't have to rush home. I needed to do homeschool with him as soon as I got home, but it wasn't like an urgent situation. Somebody was having a hard time starting their car, and I realized, like, I have jumper cables, and my first thought was like, oh, it's going to take so much time, and I don't know how to jump a car. I just have the cables, but what if they don't even know how to jump a car, And so I really didn't want to, but I realized I had the capacity. And I had, in that moment, I could actually help somebody, and it wasn't going to drain me, harm me. Like, it was good. I was in a good place. So I was able to do that and give like a half an hour of my time to do that. And I wasn't stressed after because I had the capacity for it. So I think that's the big thing, is you still can help people. You still can say yes, but you're in control. You're the one that decides if this is a yes or a no. And it's not the other person with their need telling you if you have to help them or not.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
that's,
I think that speaks a lot to the importance of, controlling your internal climate, regardless of what your external situations are, and being able to, I mean, first of all, you have to be in tune enough with that to be able to check in and evaluate, do I have capacity or not? Because we've been so conditioned to say yes when we have no capacity, or what I say, what I've experienced, negative capacity. It's not just zero, it's negative. You're already in capacity debt. And then you say yes to another thing, so it's like, I feel like just even you have to be at this place of awareness, like, is where it starts. It's not enough to just be aware. You've got to take action, but it does need to start there of like, I don't know. And then on those moments, I know I've had this as I've started to kind of get more on the recovery side of adrenal fatigue, is like, all of a sudden I'll be like 2:00 in the afternoon and I realize I have a spurt of capacity. And so all of a sudden I'm like, husband, what do you want to get done right now? Because all of a sudden I have some capacity, And so like capitalizing on that, because it might go away within an hour. But it's there. I can feel it now, the difference, because I've tapped into like the awareness of that. So I love what you're saying.
And just to add in real quick, the process of awareness, I think for me, has, in those moments, you don't always have a lot of time. Sometimes you do have time to think through, do I have the capacity for this when a need arises? But going through a series of checking your priorities, if you have a very clear idea of what your priorities are and you can check those quickly, maybe it's 3 things, at most 5, you can check those things off. And if none of those priorities are going to suffer, then you can say yes. But if any one of those priorities is going to suffer, it's a no. And it kind of, if you have that mental checklist in your mind, you can make those decisions a lot quicker. And that has helped me be able to say yes or no when I know what my priorities are. If you don't know what they even are, you don't even know what's suffering. If you say yes or no, it's a lot more confusing to know what you even have capacity for. So I think that's been a really big help for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about your story. I want you to write a book on burnout, because I feel like the message in this content, I mean, there's literally things I've never heard before, and I listen to tons of podcasts and self-help stuff. So like, we are waiting for that burnout book. Don't forget about writing it, but eventually, as you have capacity, a book would be phenomenal. But I just know that this is valuable for everyone. I mean, you don't have to be a missionary in a third world country to experience this. It's just like the slow, low grade buildup residue of stressful living in the in 2020 and in our modern world. Our bodies are not really equipped to deal with the amount of trauma and stress we're faced with all the time. So I know, from single lady to mother to compassion worker, you've shared something that we can all do starting today for free. That doesn't even cost us money. which is
Yeah.
so important because for some people that's their biggest, they're like, I can't afford therapy. I can't afford another supplement. And that's a real
Mhm.
crisis too, is people think that health isn't accessible to them. They're interested, but it doesn't
Mhm.
feel accessible. Um, so to have a perspective from someone who's very remote and doesn't even have a lot of access, um,
Mhm.
we realize like, oh, wow, we can do some of these things for really low or no cost. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
You're
I
so
have enjoyed
welcome.
this
It's a pleasure.
conversation, sis, and you take care. We'll probably have to have you on again at some point. So
I would love to. Thank you so much.
bye.